I have always believed in God, from the moment I was old enough to understand the world. I was taught that faith was the foundation of everything. My mother used to say, "Without God, we are nothing." Michael, remember that. I held on to those words as I grew up, and by the time I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to serving Him. Becoming a priest wasn't just a choice, it was a calling. At least, that's what I told myself. I spent years in seminary studying scripture, theology, and church doctrine. I memorized prayers, performed rituals, and learned what it meant to be a shepherd for God's people. When I was finally ordained, it felt like everything had fallen into place. I had a purpose, a mission. For years I served in a small town in Mexico, a place where faith was woven into everyday life. The people there trusted me. They came to me for advice, for guidance, for comfort when life was too much to bear. I baptized their children, presided over their weddings, and blessed their homes. On the surface, I was everything a priest should be. But deep inside, something never felt quite right. I didn't talk about it with anyone. How could I? A priest is supposed to be a pillar of faith, unwavering and strong. But in the quiet moments, when the church was empty and the candles flickered against the old stone walls, I felt it, the doubt. I prayed every day, led Mass with devotion, and followed every tradition passed down through generations. But despite all of it, I sometimes wondered if I truly knew God, or if I was just going through the motions. Was I really leading people closer to Him, or was I just maintaining an institution? I tried to ignore these thoughts, convincing myself they were just moments of weakness, but they never fully left me. And then, one night, everything changed. It started like any other evening. The town had gone quiet, most people already home with their families. I had finished my final prayers for the day and was alone in the church, sitting in front of the altar. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets outside and the faint hum of the wind moving through the cracks of the old wooden doors. I remember looking up at the large crucifix hanging above the altar, staring into the eyes of Jesus on the cross. What am I missing? I thought to myself. Why do I feel so far from you? I closed my eyes, whispering a quiet prayer, asking for guidance, for clarity, anything to push away the feeling of emptiness. And then it happened. At first, it was just a slight pressure in my chest. Nothing alarming, just enough to make me shift uncomfortably. I adjusted my posture, thinking maybe I had been sitting too long. But then the pressure grew stronger, spreading like fire through my ribs. I gasped, gripping my chest. The pain shot down my arm, and suddenly it was as if every ounce of strength in my body drained away. My vision blurred, the candlelight stretching into strange, distorted streaks. I tried to push myself up from the pew, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My breathing became shallow, my head spinning as the world around me started to tilt. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I was dying. The realization hit me like a brick. My body was shutting down, right here, in the very place I had dedicated my life to serving. Alone, with no one to call for help. I tried to reach out, my fingers brushing against the altar, as if touching it would somehow keep me grounded, keep me here. But my strength was fading fast. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold tile floor. My head struck the hard surface, but I barely registered the impact. All I could feel was the crushing weight in my chest, the burning in my lungs as I struggled for air. I wanted to call out, to say something, maybe a final prayer, maybe just a cry for help. But no words came. The edges of my vision darkened, my thoughts slowing like a fading echo. And then everything went still. No pain, no sound, just nothing. I don't know how long I was there floating in that emptiness. It could have been seconds, minutes, or even hours. Time didn't exist in that space. Then slowly, something changed. A strange sensation washed over me, like I was being lifted. Not physically, but in a way I had never felt before. I became aware of the room again, but not in the way I had known it before. It was as if I was seeing it from a different angle. And that's when I saw myself, lying on the floor, completely still, my own body lifeless beneath me. I wasn't in it anymore. That was the moment I knew I was dead. The moment everything went black. I expected that to be the end. My mind was empty, my body numb. It was as though all the weight, the pain, the noise of life had vanished in an instant. But what came next was something I could never have imagined. At first, I became aware of a faint sensation, like I was floating in water, weightless and detached. Slowly, the darkness around me began to shift, giving way to something else. I didn't have a body, at least not in the way I understood it, but I could feel myself moving, rising. The sensation was strange, like being pulled upward by an invisible force. I didn't resist. I wasn't even sure I could. That's when I saw myself. I was lying on the cold tile floor of the church, motionless. My body looked small, fragile, like a discarded shell. My arms were limp at my sides, and the faint glow of the candles flickered across my pale face. I could even see the small smear of blood on the ground where my head had struck the floor. It was surreal. There I was, looking at myself, but I wasn't afraid. I should have been panicking, shouldn't I? But all I felt was a strange calm, like the chaos of the world had been left behind. I hovered there, watching the scene below, unable to move closer or farther away. The church around me felt different too. It wasn't just the angle, it was the atmosphere. The warm, familiar sanctuary where I had prayed, preached, and served for so many years now felt foreign. Then I noticed something else, a shadow. It moved just beyond the reach of the candlelight, flickering between the pews. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I realized it was getting closer. And it wasn't alone. More shadows began to appear, creeping out of the darkness like smoke. They moved unnaturally, their shapes shifting and swirling as they approached. I couldn't see faces or features, just shadows, but I could feel them. The air grew heavier, colder. There was a weight to their presence, like they were pressing down on me, even though I wasn't in my body. The calm I had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The shadows didn't speak, not in words, but I could hear them. Whispers, faint and chilling, like a distant wind carrying secrets. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was enough to send a shiver through me. They were pulling me. It wasn't physical, but I could feel it. A tug, like invisible hands grabbing at my very being. They were dragging me away from the light of the altar, deeper into the shadows. I struggled against it, but it was like trying to swim against a powerful current. The more I resisted, the stronger the pull became. My thoughts raced, panic setting in as I realized I couldn't stop them. Was this it? Was this where I was going to end up? I thought about all the sermons I had given, all the times I had warned others about the reality of spiritual warfare, but I had never truly understood it. Not until now. The shadows weren't just darkness. They were something alive, and they wanted me. My mind screamed for help, but I couldn't speak. I didn't have a voice, didn't have a body. All I could do was watch as the shadows grew closer, their whispers turning into a low, menacing hum. Then, just as the darkness threatened to engulf me, something happened. A light. At first, it was faint, like a tiny spark in the distance, but it grew brighter, stronger, cutting through the shadows like a blade. The darkness recoiled, the shadows hissing and retreating as the light expanded. The weight that had been pulling me down was gone in an instant, replaced by a warmth, unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just around me, it was in me, filling every part of my being. The light was overwhelming, but not in a harsh way. It was radiant, pure, and powerful, yet it felt gentle, like it was embracing me. I couldn't look away, couldn't focus on anything else. I was being pulled toward it, but this time I didn't resist. As I moved closer, the whispers of the shadows faded completely, replaced by a silence that was almost musical. It was peaceful, calming, but also filled with a sense of anticipation, like something extraordinary was waiting just ahead. The closer I got, the more I felt it, a presence within the light. It wasn't just light for the sake of light, it was alive, full of love and power. And it was calling to me. For the first time since leaving my body, I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel fear. All I felt was the undeniable pull towards something far greater than myself. And in that moment, I knew. This was no accident. This was no dream. I was being drawn towards something divine, something that would change me forever. The light continued to draw me closer, surrounding me with warmth and peace, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. As I moved deeper into it, I became aware of a presence so overwhelming, so profound, that I instinctively knew I was approaching something far beyond my comprehension. And then I saw him. Standing at the center of the light was a figure, radiant yet distinct, as though he were both part of the light and its source. His features were clear, but they seemed to carry something more than what my eyes could fully grasp. His face radiated love and compassion, yet there was an undeniable power in his presence, an authority that made everything else seem insignificant. I stopped moving, if you could call it that. I simply stood, or existed, in awe. "Michael," he said. The sound of my name, spoken by him, was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't just a voice, it was a calling, a knowing, as though he was speaking directly into my soul. "Michael," he said again, and this time I felt the weight of it, not condemnation, not anger, just truth. I couldn't speak. What could I say? My whole life, I had spoken about Jesus, preached about his teachings, encouraged others to follow him. And now, here I was, standing in his presence, completely unprepared. He stepped closer, and the love radiating from him was almost too much to bear. It wasn't a love I had earned or deserved. It was simply there, overwhelming and unconditional. "You have served me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have dedicated your life to my work. But Michael, do you truly know me?" The question hit me like a thunderclap. My mind raced, searching for an answer. Of course I knew him, didn't I? I had spent decades studying scripture, leading mass, teaching others about his life and his sacrifice. But as I stood there, face to face with Jesus, I realized something terrible. I didn't truly know him. I thought I did, I managed to say, though my words felt weak and hollow. Jesus looked at me with an expression I can only describe as sorrowful yet hopeful, as though he already knew my answer but was waiting for me to realize it for myself. "You know about me," he said, his tone gentle yet piercing. You know the stories, the rituals, the words. But have you ever truly known me? Have you sought my heart, or have you only followed my rules? The truth of his words cut through me like a blade. I had spent my life focused on the rituals, the structure, the traditions of the church. I had measured my faith by my obedience to the institution, by how well I followed its guidelines. But had I ever truly sought a relationship with him? Had I ever opened my heart to know him beyond the words on the page? Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of it all came crashing down. I thought about all the sermons I had preached, all the advice I had given, all the times I had told others to trust in Jesus, when I myself had been too afraid to truly do the same. I don't know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I thought I was serving you. Jesus reached out, placing his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch filled me with both comfort and conviction. You have done many good things, Michael, he said, but faith is not just about what you do. It is about who you are with me. It is about knowing me, loving me, and letting that love guide everything you do. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They streamed down my face as I fell to my knees before him. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I thought I was enough. I thought I was doing enough. But I see now that I was missing the most important thing. Jesus knelt down, his face close to mine, his eyes filled with nothing but love. It is not too late, Michael, he said. You can know me. You can still walk with me. Not just for me. His words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the despair I had fallen into. For the first time, I understood the difference between the faith I had practiced and the faith he was calling me to. It wasn't about the rituals, the structure, or even the position I held as a priest. It was about him. Teach me, I said, looking up at him through my tears. Teach me how to know you. Jesus smiled, and in that moment, the light around us seemed to grow even brighter. This is the beginning, Michael, he said, but there is much more to see. And with that, the world around us began to shift again, and I felt myself being drawn deeper into his presence. The light around me shifted, becoming richer and deeper, as though it carried layers of meaning I couldn't yet grasp. Jesus stood before me, his presence unwavering, and I could feel that he was about to show me something important, something that would change me forever. Michael, he said, his voice both gentle and firm. You've spent your life serving me, but there is a deeper truth you need to see. Before I could respond, the light transformed again, and suddenly I was no longer standing in its warmth. Instead, I was watching scenes from my own life, as if I were looking through a window. They weren't just memories, they were moments of my ministry, times when I thought I had been doing God's work. But now, seeing them through his eyes, I noticed things I hadn't seen before. In one scene, I was blessing a family's new home. The mother held her baby tightly, her eyes filled with gratitude as I sprinkled holy water and prayed over them. At the time, I had felt proud of my role as their priest, thinking I was bringing God's presence into their lives. But now, as I watched the scene unfold, I realized I had rushed through the blessing, distracted by the next appointment on my schedule. I hadn't taken the time to truly listen to them, to understand their fears or their hopes. I had performed the ritual, but I hadn't been present with them. The scene shifted, and I saw myself giving a sermon in the church. The pews were full, and I was speaking passionately about the importance of faith and obedience. I had delivered that sermon countless times, confident that I was inspiring my congregation to follow God. But as I watched it now, I saw faces in the crowd that I hadn't noticed before, faces filled with doubt, pain, and longing. They weren't looking for rules or rituals. They were searching for something deeper, something real. And I hadn't seen it. I hadn't met them where they were. Tears began to well up in my eyes as the scenes continued to play. I saw moment after moment where I had focused on the traditions of the church, the outward expressions of faith, while missing the deeper needs of the people I was called to serve. It wasn't that the rituals were wrong, they had their place, but I had made them the center of my ministry, instead of making Jesus the center. "Do you see now, Michael?" Jesus asked, his voice cutting through the weight of my emotions. "Faith is not about the actions you perform. It's about the love you live. The rituals are meant to point to me, but too often they become the focus instead of the means." I nodded, unable to speak. The truth of his words was undeniable, and it pierced me to my core. For so long, I had thought that being a good priest meant following the rules, leading the ceremonies, and maintaining the traditions of the church. But now, I saw how shallow that understanding had been. Jesus continued, "The church is not an institution, Michael. It is my body. It is the people who seek me, who love me, and who love one another. It is not built with stone or wood, but with hearts that are open to my grace." As he spoke, the scenes changed again. This time, I saw moments where I had truly lived out his love, without even realizing it. I saw myself sitting with an elderly woman who had just lost her husband, holding her hand as she cried. I saw myself giving the last rites to a young man in a hospital, his family gathered around, their faces etched with sorrow. I saw myself helping a poor farmer repair his roof after a storm, my hands blistered from the work. "These are the moments when you knew me," Jesus said, "not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were loving. These were the times when your heart was aligned with mine." I felt a mixture of awe and shame as I watched these scenes, awe at the power of love to bring light into the darkest moments, and shame at how rarely I had allowed that love to guide me fully. For every moment of true connection, there were countless others where I had fallen short, where I had prioritized the structure of my role over the heart of my mission. Jesus stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion. "Michael, I do not condemn you. I know your heart, and I know the burdens you've carried. But now, you see the truth, and with that truth comes a choice." "A choice?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he said. "You can continue as you were, doing good, but never fully knowing me. Or you can let go of the traditions that have held you back and step into the fullness of my love. You can lead others to me, not through rituals, but through a life that reflects my grace." The weight of his words settled on me, and I knew there was no turning back. I couldn't unsee what he had shown me. I couldn't unlearn the truth. For so long, I had thought my role as a priest was about preserving the church, but now I realized it was about something far greater, pointing people to Jesus, helping them know him as I was coming to know him now. "I want to choose you," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. "I want to truly know you, to live for you." Jesus smiled, and the light around him seemed to glow even brighter. "Then follow me, Michael, and trust that I will guide you every step of the way." As he spoke, I felt a warmth fill my chest, a sense of peace and purpose that I had never known before. The doubts, the fears, the questions that had plagued me for so long began to fade. They weren't gone completely, but they no longer controlled me. This was the beginning of something new, something real. The light around us began to shift again, and I could feel that my journey wasn't over yet. There was more to see, more to understand, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. As the light around me settled, I stood there, still overwhelmed by everything I had just seen. The weight of my life, my choices, my faith, my doubts, it was pressing on me. But at the same time, there was an undeniable sense of clarity. For the first time, I truly understood what had been missing, and my heart longed to hold on to this truth forever. Jesus stepped closer, his gaze filled with both love and purpose. I could feel that something significant was about to happen, something that would change the direction of my life entirely. "Michael," he said, his voice steady yet gentle, "what you have seen here is not just for you. It is for them, for all those who are searching, for those who are lost, and for those who have placed their faith in the wrong things." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. My mind raced with questions. How could I, someone who had spent years focused on rituals and traditions, lead others to something deeper? How could I possibly live up to the truth he had shown me? Jesus seemed to hear my thoughts before I could speak them. "You are not being called to be perfect," he said. "You are being called to be faithful. It is not your strength that will carry this mission. It is mine." He lifted his hand, and in an instant, the light around us shifted again. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in the calm, radiant space. Instead, I was seeing the world, our world, as if from above. It wasn't a vision of physical landscapes or countries, but of hearts, lives, and souls. I saw people everywhere, moving through their daily routines, their faces filled with a quiet despair. Some were burdened by poverty, others by isolation or loss. Many were surrounded by the comforts of life, yet felt empty inside. The details were different, but the core was the same. A deep longing for something more, something real. I saw churches, some filled with people, and others nearly empty. In many of them, the focus was on the rituals, the words spoken, the hymns sung, the traditions upheld. But I could feel the absence of true connection. It was like a hollow shell, beautiful on the outside, but lacking the substance that gave it meaning. And then I saw something else. I saw moments of genuine faith, scattered like small lights across the darkness. A mother praying over her child, a young man choosing forgiveness instead of anger, a stranger offering kindness to someone in need. These moments were simple, often unnoticed by the world, but they were powerful. They carried the essence of what Jesus had been teaching me, that faith is not about grand displays or rigid practices, but about love, humility, and connection. As the vision continued, I felt a deep sorrow for the people who were lost in the tradition, who believed they were doing enough by following the rules, but had never truly known the love of Jesus. I understood now what he had meant when he said, "It is not too late." These people weren't hopeless. They just needed someone to show them the way. "Do you see, Michael?" Jesus said, his voice breaking through the vision. "This is the world I came to save, and it is the world I am calling you to serve." Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to him. "But how?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How can I reach them? How can I help them see what I've seen?" Jesus smiled, his expression filled with both encouragement and conviction. "By living the truth you now know," he said. "By showing them my love, not just telling them about it. By walking alongside them, not above them. and by reminding them that their worth is not in what they do, but in who they are in me. His words settled into my heart like seeds being planted in fertile soil. I didn't know how I would accomplish this mission, but I knew I couldn't turn away from it. The world needed this message, this truth, and I was being entrusted to carry it. Before I could speak again, Jesus raised his hand, and the light grew brighter, enveloping us both. I felt him place his hand on my chest, right over my heart. The warmth was immediate, spreading through me like a wave of energy and peace. "Michael," he said, his tone both commanding and compassionate, "you are not alone. I will be with you in every step, in every word, and in every moment. Trust me, and I will guide you." As his hand rested on my chest, I felt something change within me. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing me to see the world and my purpose with a clarity I had never known. The doubts and fears that had once held me back were still there, but they no longer had the same power. They were outweighed by the overwhelming sense of love, hope, and determination that now filled me. The light around us began to shift once more, and I knew what was happening. My time here was coming to an end. I would have to return to my body, to my life, and to the mission Jesus had given me. Before the light fully faded, Jesus spoke one final time. "Remember, Michael, it is not about what you know. It is about who you know, and I have always known you." With those words, the light dimmed, and I felt myself being drawn back, as though I were being gently lowered into the world I had left behind. The peace of his presence stayed with me, even as I felt the weight of my physical body returning. I didn't know what awaited me on the other side, but one thing was certain. I was no longer the same man I had been. I had been entrusted with a mission, and I knew I could not fail him. The first thing I noticed as I came back was the sound of voices. They were faint at first, muffled like they were coming from far away. Slowly, they grew clearer, urgent voices, speaking in quick, worried tones. My chest felt heavy, my body weak, but I was alive. I opened my eyes, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light above me. It took a moment to realize where I was. The hospital. Machines beeped softly around me, and I could feel the steady pulse of something cold running through the IV in my arm. A nurse leaned over me, relief washing over her face as she saw me regain consciousness. "Father Michael," she said softly, "you're awake." Awake. The word felt heavier than it should have. I wasn't just awake physically. I was awake spiritually, in a way I had never been before. The memories of what had just happened, the light, the encounter with Jesus, the mission he had given me, they were as vivid as the room I now found myself in. The nurse stepped aside as a doctor came in, speaking quickly about my condition. He said something about a heart attack, how they had nearly lost me, how it was a miracle I had survived. I nodded along, not fully listening. My mind was elsewhere, replaying every word Jesus had spoken to me. Once the doctor left, I was alone for a while. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of it all sinking in. I had died. I had stood before Jesus, and now I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at living with purpose. The next few days were a blur. Friends from the parish visited, offering their prayers and support. They called me lucky, blessed to be alive. I smiled and thanked them, but inside, I knew this wasn't just luck. This was something far greater. As soon as I was strong enough, I began trying to share my experience. I told my fellow priests about what had happened, about what Jesus had shown me. I spoke about the light, the visions, the truth I had come to understand, that faith is not about titles or traditions, but about truly knowing Him. Most of them listened politely, but dismissed it quickly. They said it was likely just a dream, a product of my mind under stress. These things happen during near-death experiences, one of them said, his tone gentle but patronizing. Don't read too much into it. But I couldn't ignore it. I knew in my heart that what I had experienced was real. Not everyone was skeptical. A few people, parishioners, friends, listened intently, their eyes filled with wonder. "Father Michael," one woman said, her voice trembling, "do you think Jesus is really calling us to something different?" "Yes," I told her, my voice steady. "He's calling all of us, not to follow rituals blindly, but to truly know Him, to live with love, humility, and compassion." That conversation marked the beginning of my new ministry. When I returned to the church, I knew things couldn't go back to the way they were. I couldn't simply lead Mass, perform the rituals, and go through the motions. My heart had changed, and I knew my work had to reflect that. I began focusing on the people, really seeing them, listening to their struggles, and walking alongside them in their faith journeys. I spent more time with the sick, the poor, and the lost, not just offering prayers, but showing them the love of Christ through my actions. My sermons changed too. I no longer spoke about obedience to the church as the ultimate goal. Instead, I spoke about Jesus, the relationship we could have with Him, the way He longs to know us personally. I encouraged people to seek Him, not just through rituals, but through their hearts. Some people embraced this change. They said they felt closer to God than ever before. Others resisted, clinging to the traditions they had known their whole lives. And that was okay. I wasn't there to force anyone to change. I was there to guide, to love, and to reflect the truth Jesus had shown me. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt the weight of skepticism and resistance, when I wondered if I was doing enough, or if I was failing the mission Jesus had given me. But in those moments, I remembered His words, "You are not alone. I will guide you." Those words became my anchor. Months passed, and the changes in the parish were undeniable. People who had once felt disconnected from their faith began to find new meaning in their relationship with God. Families grew closer, neighbors became more compassionate, and the church became less of a building and more of a community. As for me, I found a peace I had never known before. The doubts that had once haunted me were gone, replaced by a quiet confidence in the love of Christ. I no longer measured my worth by my role as a priest or by how well I performed the rituals. I knew now that my worth was in Him, and that was enough. One evening, as I sat in the empty church, the candles flickering softly around me, I thought back to the moment I had fallen to the floor that night. I remembered the pain, the fear, and the darkness that had surrounded me. But more than that, I remembered the light, the overwhelming, radiant light of His presence. Faith, I realized, was never meant to be about titles or traditions. It was always meant to be about Him, about knowing Him, loving Him, and letting that love transform every part of our lives. As I knelt before the altar, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for myself, but for the people I had been called to serve. "Lord, help me to show them what You have shown me. Help me to lead them to You." And in that moment, I felt His presence again, as real and as powerful as it had been that night. I knew then that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I had been called to do. The journey wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next.